Welcome. Find a comfortable place to settle in. What you're about to hear is a story, told slowly, meant to accompany you through quiet hours. You might be working, resting, or drifting towards sleep. Whatever brings you here, there's no rush. Let the words come to you gently. This is a story about wisdom that has traveled through centuries. It comes from a time when people gathered in town squares, when news spread by word of mouth, and when advice was passed down through simple sayings that anyone could remember. The ideas we'll explore tonight were first shared in the 1700s, but they speak to something timeless in human nature. The way we spend our days. The way we think about our time and energy. The quiet choices we make when no one is watching. At the heart of this story is a man named Benjamin Franklin. You may know him from history books, from images on currency, from tales of kites and keys and lightning. But long before he was a statesman or a scientist, Franklin was a printer and a writer. And like many writers, he understood that people don't always want to hear wisdom delivered in a stern voice. They want to smile while they learn. They want truth wrapped in a story. So Franklin created a character. He called him Poor Richard. This was a humble, plain-spoken fellow who published an almanac each year. Almanacs were common in those days. They told you when to plant seeds, when the moon would be full, when the tides would turn. But Poor Richard's almanac was different. Between the weather predictions and the calendar dates, Franklin tucked in small sayings. Proverbs. Observations about human nature. Little reminders about how to live well. Some of these sayings were gentle. Some were funny. Some had a bit of a sting. But they all shared something in common. They came from watching real people make real choices. Poor Richard wasn't preaching from a pulpit. He was noticing what worked and what didn't. What brought people peace and what brought them trouble. Year after year, Franklin filled his almanac with these small pieces of wisdom. And year after year, people bought it, read it, remembered it. The sayings became part of everyday conversation. When someone was being lazy, a friend might say, "Well, as Poor Richard says, the sleeping fox catches no poultry." When someone was being foolish with money, another might remind them, as Poor Richard says, "A small leak will sink a great ship." After doing this for many years, Franklin decided to do something clever. He gathered up all these scattered sayings, all these little proverbs he'd been dropping into his almanacs, and he wove them together into a single story. He called it The Way to Wealth, though some editions called it Poor Richard Improved. The story itself is simple. Franklin imagines himself stopping his horse near a crowd of people. They're gathered for an auction, waiting for the sale to begin. And while they wait, they do what people have always done when they gather together. They talk about their worries. They complain about the times they're living in. They wonder how they'll manage to pay their bills, how they'll get by, how things got so difficult. Picture this scene. It's a warm day, perhaps. Dust in the air from the road. Horses tied nearby, swishing their tails. Merchants' goods laid out on tables, waiting to be sold. People standing in small groups, some in their work clothes, some in their Sunday best. The mood is heavy. Everyone seems worried. And in this crowd, there's an old man. He has white hair, a clean but simple appearance. His face shows the lines of many years lived. He stands quietly, listening to the chatter around him. This is Father Abraham. We don't know much about him except that he seems to carry a kind of calm authority. He's the sort of person people turn to when they need perspective. Someone in the crowd notices him. Turns to him. The words come out like a sigh. "Father Abraham," this person says, What do you think of the times we're living in? These taxes are crushing us. How will we ever manage to pay them? The government keeps asking for more and more. What would you advise us to do? It's a question born from genuine worry. These people are tired. They feel pressed down by circumstances they can't control. They're looking for answers, for hope, for some way forward. Father Abraham stands up. There's a moment of quiet as people notice. They gather closer. They want to hear what this wise old man has to say. And when he speaks, his voice is measured and kind. If you want my advice, he tells them, I'll give it to you briefly. After all, a word to the wise is enough. The crowd murmurs in agreement. Yes, they say. Please. Tell us what you think. They press in closer, forming a circle around him, and Father Abraham begins to speak. My friends, Father Abraham begins, and there's warmth in the way he says it. Not the forced warmth of someone trying to convince you of something, but the genuine warmth of someone who has lived long enough to see patterns repeat themselves. The taxes are indeed very heavy. I won't pretend otherwise. When the government asks for a portion of what we earn, we feel it. We count the coins and we wonder how we'll stretch what remains to cover everything we need. He pauses. Lets that truth settle. He's not dismissing their concerns. He understands. But here's what I've noticed, he continues. If these government taxes were the only burden we carried, we might manage them more easily. The truth is, we pile other taxes on top of ourselves. Taxes that no government imposes. Taxes that come from our own choices, our own habits, our own way of moving through the world. The crowd is listening now. Really listening. Because this isn't what they expected to hear. They came looking for advice about money and politics, and instead they're being asked to look at something closer to home. We tax ourselves, Father Abraham says quietly, through our idleness. Through our pride. Through our folly. And these taxes, my friends, are far heavier than anything a government could ask of us. Let's sit with that idea for a moment. Because it's easy to hear words like idleness and pride and folly and think we understand them. But Father Abraham is pointing to something deeper. He's talking about the ways we work against our own interests without even realizing it. Think about idleness. Not the kind of rest that restores us, not the quiet moments we need to gather our thoughts and catch our breath. But the kind of inaction that comes from avoidance. From distraction. From letting the hours slip away while we tell ourselves we'll start tomorrow. We'll begin that project tomorrow. We'll have that difficult conversation tomorrow. We'll take care of that responsibility tomorrow. And tomorrow comes, and we push it forward again. Not because we're bad people. Not because we lack ability. But because in the moment, it feels easier to do nothing. It feels safer to stay where we are than to move forward into something that might be difficult or uncomfortable. This is the tax of idleness. Every day we delay, we're paying interest on that delay. The task doesn't go away. It grows heavier. The conversation doesn't become easier. It becomes more awkward. The responsibility doesn't shrink. It accumulates consequences. Imagine someone who needs to repair a small leak in their roof. It's not urgent yet. Just a few drops when it rains hard. They think about it, notice it, tell themselves they'll take care of it soon. But weeks pass. Then months. The leak grows. The water damage spreads. What could have been fixed in an afternoon now requires major work. What might have cost a modest amount now costs considerably more. And all the while, there's this background hum of worry. This nagging awareness that something needs attention but isn't getting it. That's what idleness costs us. Not just the practical consequences, though those are real, but the mental weight. The way undone things occupy space in our minds, creating a kind of static that makes it harder to think clearly about anything else. Now consider pride. And when we say pride here, we don't mean the healthy kind. Not the satisfaction of work well done, not the dignity of knowing your own worth. We mean the kind of pride that demands we present a certain image to the world. The kind that says we must look a certain way, own certain things, live up to certain expectations, even when those expectations don't serve us. This kind of pride is expensive. It asks us to spend money we might not have on things we might not need, simply because of how we think it makes us appear. It keeps us from accepting help because we don't want others to know we're struggling. It prevents us from making practical choices because we're worried what people might think. Someone might drive a car they can barely afford to repair because they believe it reflects success. They might live in a place that stretches their budget thin because of the address. They might buy clothes, gadgets, experiences, not because these things genuinely add value to their life, but because they're worried about being judged for not having them. And here's the painful part. Most of the people whose opinions we're trying to manage aren't paying nearly as much attention to us as we imagine. They're too busy managing their own concerns, maintaining their own images, dealing with their own version of this same struggle. So we exhaust ourselves trying to impress people who aren't watching, or who don't care as much as we fear they do. We spend resources we could use for genuine security and peace, and we spend them instead on maintaining an appearance. That's the tax of pride. Then there's folly. And folly is perhaps the most personal of these taxes, because it looks different for each of us. Folly is making the same mistake repeatedly, even after we've seen where it leads. It's ignoring what experience has taught us. It's rushing into decisions without thought, or staying paralyzed in indecision when action is needed. Folly might look like buying things on impulse and regretting it later, but doing it again next month. It might look like staying in situations that drain us because change feels too daunting. It might look like neglecting our health, our relationships, our responsibilities, and then being surprised when problems arise. We all have our own versions of folly. The patterns we repeat. The lessons we have to learn multiple times before they truly sink in. And each time we repeat these patterns, we pay. Sometimes we pay in money. Sometimes in time. Sometimes in opportunities we miss or relationships we damage or peace we lose. Father Abraham is telling this crowd something they already know, in a way. They've felt these taxes. They've experienced the weight of their own inaction, their own need to keep up appearances, their own repeated mistakes. But hearing it named plainly, hearing it laid out in simple terms, that's different. That's the moment when something that was vague and formless becomes clear enough to actually do something about. From these taxes, Father Abraham tells them, his voice still gentle, no government official can grant you relief. There's no form to fill out, no appeal to make, no reduction you can negotiate. These are taxes you levy on yourself, and only you can choose to lift them. The crowd is quieter now. Not the restless quiet of people waiting impatiently, but the thoughtful quiet of people who are actually considering what they're hearing. However, Father Abraham continues, and there's hope in that word, let us listen to good advice, and something can be done. As poor Richard says, God helps them that help themselves. And with that, he prepares to dig deeper. To talk about what help looks like. To explore these ideas one by one, starting with the first and perhaps the most insidious of these self-imposed burdens. The tax of idleness. The cost of all the things we mean to do but never quite begin. Father Abraham shifts slightly, and you can almost see him gathering his thoughts. He's about to talk about time, and there's something tender in the way he approaches it. Because time is the one thing every person in that crowd has. Rich or poor, young or old, we all wake up to the same hours in a day. Think about this, he says. Imagine if the government announced a new law. One that said you must give them 1/10 of your time. Not your money, but your actual hours. Out of every 10 hours you have, 1 belongs to the state. You'd consider that an outrageous burden, wouldn't you? You'd feel robbed. You'd call it tyranny. People in the crowd nod. Of course they would object to such a thing. And yet, Father Abraham continues, many of us give away far more than 1/10 of our time to idleness. We lose it not to any government, but to our own reluctance to engage with the day in front of us. And we lose it so gradually, so quietly, that we barely notice it happening. There's a saying he shares, one that poor Richard recorded in his almanac: sloth, like rust, consumes faster than labor wears, while the used key is always bright. Let's think about that image. A key that's used regularly stays shiny. The friction of turning in the lock, day after day, keeps it polished. But a key that sits unused begins to corrode. Rust creeps in. The metal deteriorates not from use but from neglect. And eventually, that unused key might not turn at all. Our lives are like that. When we engage with them, when we use our energy and attention, we stay vital. Sharp. Present. But when we let days drift by without purpose, when we avoid effort, something starts to corrode inside us. Not dramatically. Not all at once. But gradually, the way rust forms. A little today, a little more tomorrow. And here's what's interesting. The work itself, the actual effort of doing things, that doesn't wear us down the way we fear it will. It's the rust of inaction that truly depletes us. The weight of things left undone. The exhaustion that comes not from doing too much but from avoiding what we know we should address. Think about someone who's been putting off organizing a cluttered room. Every time they walk past it, there's a small drain on their energy. They see the mess. They think about dealing with it. They feel a twinge of guilt or frustration. And then they close the door and try not to think about it. But it's still there, in the back of their mind, taking up space. And that takes more energy over time than simply spending an afternoon sorting through the clutter would have taken. The used key stays bright. The person who faces the task, who moves through it, comes out the other side clearer. Lighter. Father Abraham then says something that might sound harsh at first, but listen to the care underneath it. Do you love life? He asks. Then do not squander time, for that is the stuff life is made of. Time is the stuff life is made of. Not money, though we often act as if money is the primary currency. Not possessions, though we accumulate them as if they could fill the spaces inside us. Time is what we actually have. Each moment that passes is a moment of our life, being spent on something. On work or rest, on connection or isolation, on attention or distraction, on growth or stagnation. When we squander time, we're squandering life itself. And that's worth sitting with for a moment. Not to make ourselves feel guilty. Guilt isn't useful here. But to really understand what's at stake. How many hours do we give to things that don't nourish us? Not the rest that restores us, that's different. That's necessary. But the scrolling, the numbing, the half-engaged drifting through activities we don't even enjoy, that we'll barely remember. We do them because they're easy. Because they ask nothing of us. And then we look up and hours have vanished, and we're more tired than when we started, and we can't quite say what we did with that time. Father Abraham mentions sleep. How much more than is necessary do we spend in sleep, he asks. And then he shares another saying, the sleeping fox catches no poultry. There's a gentleness to his point. He's not saying sleep is bad. Sleep is essential. Our bodies need it. Our minds need it. But there's a difference between sleep that heals and sleep that's just another form of hiding. Sometimes we sleep extra hours not because we're tired, but because we don't want to face the day. Because if we're asleep, we don't have to make decisions or deal with difficulties. The sleeping fox catches no poultry. The person who stays in bed isn't engaging with life. And life, for all its challenges, is where everything that matters happens. Father Abraham adds, with a touch of gentle humor, that there will be sleeping enough in the grave. Which is just a way of reminding us that our time here, awake and aware and able to participate, is limited. There's an end coming for all of us. Not to be morbid about it, but to remember that this day, this hour, this moment, it's precious precisely because it won't come again. If time is the most precious thing we have, Father Abraham continues, then wasting time must be the greatest wastefulness of all. Because lost time is never found again. And what we call time enough always proves to be less than enough. Think about how often we tell ourselves we have time. Time to start that project. Time to learn that skill. Time to have that important conversation. Time to make a change. And then years pass, and we realize that the time we thought we had was already being spent on something, whether we meant to spend it that way or not. There's never a perfect moment coming. There's never a time when everything will be in place, when all obstacles will be cleared, when starting will be easy. There's only now. This imperfect, messy, complicated now. And what we do with it matters. Father Abraham urges, let us be up and doing with purpose. Not frantic activity. Not busyness for its own sake. But engaged effort. Attention given to things that matter. And when we work this way, with diligence, with focus, we accomplish more with less confusion and strain than we do when we scatter our energy across 100 half-started things. He offers another observation, sloth makes all things difficult, but industry makes all things easy. That might seem backwards at first. We think of work as the hard thing and laziness as the easy thing. But anyone who's ever procrastinated knows the truth of this. When we avoid a task, it grows in our imagination. It becomes this huge, overwhelming thing. We build it up in our minds until it feels almost impossible. But when we finally face it, when we actually begin, we often discover it wasn't as terrible as we thought. The difficulty was largely in the avoiding. The actual doing, while it takes effort, has a clarity to it. A simplicity. One step, then another. Forward motion. Someone who rises late, Father Abraham says, must rush through the entire day. They're always trying to catch up, always feeling behind. They move through their tasks with a kind of desperation, and even so, they barely manage to cover what needs covering by nightfall. Meanwhile, laziness moves so slowly that poverty walks right up and overtakes it. Picture that image. Laziness is traveling somewhere, but moving at a crawl. Taking frequent breaks. Getting distracted. And poverty is walking steadily behind it. Not running. Not rushing. Just walking at a normal pace. And eventually, inevitably, poverty catches up. It's not that hard work guarantees wealth. Life is more complicated than that. But consistent effort, attention, showing up for our own lives, that creates possibilities that simply don't exist when we're passive. Drive your business, Father Abraham advises. Don't let it drive you. This is about agency. About being intentional. Your work, your responsibilities, your life, you should be steering it. Making choices about where to put your energy. When we're passive, when we're reactive, the business drives us. We're always responding, always putting out fires, always at the mercy of whatever happens next. But when we're active, when we take hold of what's in front of us and guide it with purpose, something changes. We're no longer being tossed around by circumstances. We're moving with them, through them, shaping them where we can. And then he shares that famous line, "Early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise." There's something almost musical about that phrase. The rhythm of it. And underneath the rhythm is a simple truth about how our days work. When we align ourselves with natural patterns, when we're rested, when we start our days with enough time to move through them thoughtfully, everything flows more easily. Our health improves because we're giving our bodies what they need. Our work becomes more fruitful because we're bringing our best energy to it. Our judgment sharpens because we're not making decisions from a place of exhaustion or desperation. It's not a magical formula. It's just the accumulated benefit of small, consistent choices that respect the limits and rhythms of human life. Father Abraham pauses here. Lets these ideas settle. The crowd is thinking now. Considering their own patterns. Their own relationship with time and effort and rest. Some of them are feeling the weight of recognition. Others are starting to feel something like hope. Because if the problem is in their own habits, then the solution might be within reach too. Father Abraham looks around at the gathered faces. He can see what they're thinking. They understand what he said about time and effort, about the cost of idleness. But there's still something else in their expressions. A kind of weariness. A sense that even if they work hard, even if they do everything right, the times are still difficult. The circumstances are still against them. And so he addresses that unspoken thought directly. What good does it do, he asks gently, to sit around wishing and hoping for better times? What changes when we spend our energy on wishing? It's a fair question. We all do it. We look at our circumstances and we think, if only things were different. If only the economy were better. If only opportunities were more plentiful. If only we'd been born at a different time, or in a different place, or with different advantages. And we wait. We wait for conditions to improve. For the right moment to arrive. For circumstances to align in our favor. But here's what Father Abraham understands, what anyone who has lived long enough comes to understand. The times are always difficult in some way. There has never been a perfect era, a golden age where everything was easy and everyone prospered without effort. Every generation faces its own challenges. Every period of history has its burdens. Our grandparents thought their times were hard. Our parents thought their times were hard. We think our times are hard. And our children will likely think the same about theirs. That's not pessimism. That's just the nature of being human. Life presents difficulties. That's part of the bargain. We can make these times better, Father Abraham says, and there's a quiet strength in his voice, if we bestir ourselves. Bestir ourselves. What a gentle old word that is. It doesn't mean to panic or to force or to strain. It means to rouse ourselves. To shake off the paralysis. To begin moving, even if the movement is small at first. Because better times don't arrive like a package delivered to our door. They're built. Day by day. Choice by choice. Through the accumulation of small actions that move us in a better direction. Think about someone living through a genuinely difficult period. Maybe they've lost work. Maybe there's illness in the family. Maybe circumstances have genuinely conspired to make life harder than usual. They can sit and wish that things were different. They can wait and hope that something external will shift. And there's a certain comfort in that, in believing that relief will come from outside, that they just need to hold on until conditions improve. But the person who bestirs themselves, who looks around and asks what small thing they can do today, that person starts to create change. Maybe they can't solve the big problem immediately. Maybe the external circumstances don't budge. But they can take one step. Learn one new thing. Have one conversation. Make one small improvement to their situation. And that step leads to another. And another. And gradually, sometimes so gradually they barely notice it happening, their circumstances begin to shift. Not because the times got better, but because they engaged with their life actively instead of passively waiting for rescue. Father Abraham puts it plainly, industry needs not wish, and he that lives upon hope will die fasting. Living upon hope. That phrase captures something we all recognize. Hope is necessary. It's the thing that keeps us going when everything feels dark. But hope alone, hope without action, hope that just sits and waits, that's not enough. That's the kind of hope that leaves us hungry. Industry needs not wish. The person who is actively engaged, actively working, actively participating in shaping their life, they don't spend much time wishing because they're too busy doing. They're finding out what works and what doesn't. They're making adjustments. They're learning from failures and building on successes. They're too involved in the process to spend energy on wishing. And then Father Abraham shares something that might sound obvious, but holds a deeper truth: there are no gains without pains. We don't like hearing that. We want to believe there's a shortcut. A hack. Some way to get the results without the effort. And occasionally, yes, someone gets lucky. Someone wins a lottery or inherits wealth or finds themselves in the right place at the right time. But for most of us, most of the time, gain requires pain. Not suffering. Not misery. But the discomfort of stretching beyond where we are. The difficulty of learning something new. The vulnerability of trying something that might not work. The pain of showing up day after day even when we don't feel like it. The pain of doing the work when it would be easier to avoid it. The pain of facing what needs to be faced instead of turning away. That pain is real. We shouldn't pretend it isn't. But it's also usually less than the pain that comes from avoidance. The pain of regret. The pain of watching opportunities pass by. The pain of reaching the end of a year or a decade and realizing we spent it waiting for permission to start living. He that has a trade has an estate, Father Abraham says. And he that has a calling has an office of profit and honor. What he's pointing to is the value of having something you do. Something you're developing skill in. Something you can offer. It doesn't have to be grand. It doesn't have to be prestigious. But having a trade, having a craft, having something you can do well, that gives you a kind of security that no amount of wishing can provide. But, and here's the crucial part, the trade must be worked at. The calling must be followed. It's not enough to have learned something once. It's not enough to have potential. The skill must be practiced. The craft must be engaged with regularly. Otherwise it's like having a tool you never use. The potential is there, but it's not doing anything for you. If we are truly industrious, Father Abraham assures them, we shall never starve. And he shares another vivid image: at the working person's house, hunger looks in, but dares not enter. Picture that. Hunger is a presence, peering in through the windows, but kept at bay by the activity inside. By the work being done. By the life being actively lived. It's not that the working person never faces difficulty. But there's something about engagement, about effort, about showing up for your own life that creates a kind of resilience. A barrier against the worst kinds of want. And it's not just hunger that stays outside. The bailiff and the constable, those representatives of debt and legal trouble, they too are kept at bay. Because industry pays debts while despair increases them. Think about that distinction. Despair increases debts. When we're in despair, when we've given up, when we're paralyzed, our problems compound. Bills pile up. Small issues become large ones. Interest accrues. Things that could have been handled spiral out of control. But industry, the steady application of effort, that pays debts down. Not always quickly. Not always dramatically. But consistently. A little this week. A little more next week. Forward motion, even when it's slow. Father Abraham anticipates another objection. Maybe you haven't found treasure, he says. Maybe no rich relative has left you a legacy. Maybe you weren't born into advantage. Does that mean you're doomed to struggle? No. Because diligence is the mother of good luck. And God gives all things to industry. Let's think about what he means by good luck. He's not talking about lottery wins or random windfalls. He's talking about the kind of luck that looks like luck from the outside but is actually the result of consistent effort creating opportunities. Someone who shows up every day, who does their work with care, who pays attention, who builds relationships, who keeps learning, that person will eventually find themselves in the right place at the right time more often than someone who doesn't. Not because the universe favors them, but because they've created more chances for good things to happen. They've put themselves in more situations where opportunity might arise. They've built more connections that might lead somewhere interesting. It looks like luck. But it's actually the accumulated result of many small choices to stay engaged. Work while it is called today, Father Abraham urges, for you know not how much you may be hindered tomorrow. Tomorrow is uncertain. Tomorrow might bring obstacles we can't foresee. Tomorrow we might be sick, or circumstances might shift, or opportunities might close. We can't control tomorrow. But today is here. Today is in our hands. What we do with it actually matters. One today is worth two tomorrows. The action you take now has immediate effect. The action you plan to take tomorrow is just a plan. It might happen. It might not. But what you do today is real. And so he counsels, never leave for tomorrow what you can do today. Not because we should exhaust ourselves trying to do everything at once, but because procrastination, that gentle pushing of things into the future, it has a cost. Every task delayed is a task that weighs on us. Every responsibility postponed is one more thing taking up space in our awareness. Imagine if you were a servant, Father Abraham suggests, working for a good master. Would you not feel ashamed if that master caught you idle? If they came around the corner and found you standing still, staring off, doing nothing? Most of us would feel that shame. That sense of not upholding our end of an agreement. But then he asks the harder question. Are you not your own master? Are you not responsible to yourself? Should you not feel that same shame when you catch yourself idle? When you could be doing something for yourself, for your family, for your own future? We're often easier on ourselves than we'd be on a servant. We let ourselves waste time in ways we'd never tolerate in someone who worked for us. And in doing so, we're not being kind to ourselves. We're being negligent. Handle your tools without mittens, Father Abraham says. Meaning work directly. Work with full contact. Don't try to do things halfway, at a distance, with layers of protection or excuse between you and the task. The cat in gloves catches no mice. If you're going to do something, really do it. Commit to it. Engage with it fully. That's where results come from. And if you stick to it steadily, he promises, you'll see great effects. Not overnight, but over time. Because constant dropping wears away stones. Because through diligence and patience, the mouse ate through the cable. These are images of persistence. Of small efforts, repeated. Water falling on stone doesn't do much in one drop. But over years, it carves canyons. A mouse gnawing at a rope doesn't seem like a threat. But given enough time, enough patient work, even the thickest cable gives way. That's what we're capable of. Not dramatic transformation in a moment, but steady change through sustained effort. The kind of change that doesn't look like much day to day, but over months and years becomes undeniable. Father Abraham pauses. He can see some restlessness in the crowd now. Not disagreement exactly, but a kind of tension. Because what he's describing, this life of steady industry, of constant engagement, it sounds exhausting. It sounds like there's no room for anything else. No space to breathe. And so he addresses what he knows they're thinking, even before they ask it aloud. I can hear some of you wondering, he says with a gentle smile, must a person afford themselves no leisure at all? Is it all just work, from dawn until we collapse? The question hangs in the air. Because it's a real question. We all need rest. We all need time to simply be, without purpose or productivity. Without that, we become brittle. We lose touch with the things that make life worth living in the first place. Father Abraham's answer is careful. I will tell you what poor Richard says about this, he begins. Employ your time well, if you want to gain leisure. And since you are not sure of a minute, do not throw away an hour. Let's sit with that for a moment. Because it's not the answer we might expect. He's not saying you can't have leisure. He's saying that leisure, real leisure, is something earned through the right use of time. Think about the difference between true leisure and mere idleness. True leisure is rest that restores. It's time spent in ways that fill us back up. A walk in the evening air. A conversation with someone we care about. Reading something that opens our mind. Creating something with our hands just for the joy of it. Sitting quietly and letting our thoughts settle like silt in still water. This kind of leisure is nourishing. We come back from it renewed. Our minds are clearer. Our hearts are lighter. We return to our responsibilities with fresh energy, with perspective we didn't have before. But idleness is different. Idleness is time that drains away without giving anything back. It's the hours spent half engaged with things we don't even enjoy. The scrolling that leaves us more agitated than when we started. The distractions we turn to not because they refresh us but because we're avoiding something else. The paralysis that comes from not knowing what to do, so we do nothing, and feel worse for it. When Father Abraham says employ your time well if you want to gain leisure, he's pointing to something important. The person who works with focus and purpose during their working hours creates space for genuine rest. Their mind isn't cluttered with undone tasks. They're not carrying the weight of things they meant to do but didn't. When they stop working, they can actually stop. They can be present in their rest. But the person who drifts through their working hours, who procrastinates and avoids and puts things off, that person never really rests. Even when they're not working, they're thinking about what they should be doing. There's this background anxiety, this sense of things left undone. Their leisure time is contaminated by guilt and worry. So leisure is time for doing something useful, Father Abraham explains. Not useful in the sense of productive or profitable, but useful in the deeper sense. Useful for the soul. Useful for connection. Useful for beauty or learning, or simply being alive in a way that feels rich and full. The diligent person will obtain this kind of leisure because they've structured their days in a way that creates space for it. They've done what needed doing, and now they can truly rest. But the lazy person never finds it. Never quite arrives at that place where they can settle into genuine ease. There's always something they meant to do, something nagging at them, something making it impossible to fully relax. And since we are not sure of a minute, Father Abraham reminds us, we should not throw away an hour. This isn't meant to make us frantic. It's meant to help us wake up to the preciousness of time. We assume we have hours ahead of us, days ahead of us, years ahead of us. And maybe we do. But maybe we don't. We can't know. So throwing away an hour, letting it slip through our fingers as if it meant nothing, as if there's an infinite supply, that's a kind of carelessness. Not because every moment needs to be optimized or monetized or made productive, but because time is the medium through which we experience everything that matters. Our relationships, our growth, our understanding, our joy. All of it happens in time. When we're careless with time, we're being careless with life itself. Father Abraham is painting a picture here, slowly and carefully, of what a well-lived life might look like. It's not a life of ceaseless striving. It's not a life where you never rest, where you never play, where you never simply exist without purpose. It's a life where work and rest are both given their proper place. Where effort is focused and genuine, so that rest can be deep and restorative. Where time is treated as the gift it is, neither squandered nor hoarded, but spent with intention on things that truly matter. Think about a craftsperson in their workshop. Maybe someone who works with wood. They have their hours of focused labor. The careful measuring, the precise cutting, the patient sanding. During those hours, they're fully present. Their attention is on the work. Their hands know what to do, and their mind is absorbed in the task. And then, when the day's work is done, they clean their tools. They sweep the floor. They step back and look at what they've accomplished. And they can leave the workshop with a sense of completion. The work is done. The tools are cared for. Everything is in order for tomorrow. And now they can sit on their porch as the sun sets. They can feel the satisfaction of muscles well used. They can let their mind wander. They can be with their family, or their thoughts, or the simple pleasure of evening air. This is real leisure. This is rest that actually restores. Compare that to someone who spent the same hours in that workshop but never quite committed to the work. They started several projects but finished none. They got distracted, wandered off, came back, forgot what they were doing. They left tools scattered, materials in disarray. And when evening comes, they leave the workshop feeling unsettled. Nothing is really finished. Nothing is in order. And they carry that disorder with them into the evening. They might sit on the same porch, but their mind is back in the workshop, thinking about what they should have done, feeling vaguely guilty about the wasted day. This isn't leisure. This is just more time spent in the same state of distracted unease that characterized their working hours. Father Abraham understands this. He's not trying to turn everyone into machines of productivity. He's trying to help them see that the path to genuine rest, to real peace, runs through engagement. Through showing up for our lives. Through doing what needs doing with focus and care, so that when we stop, we can truly stop. The diligent person obtains leisure. The lazy person never does. Not because laziness doesn't involve time off, but because that time off never feels like rest. It's just more of the same avoidance, the same drift, the same quiet misery of a life not fully lived. There's a kindness in this message, even though it might not seem like it at first. Father Abraham is offering a way out of that misery. He's saying you don't have to live this way. You can choose differently. You can employ your time well. You can work with focus and then rest with peace. Both are available to you. Both are yours to claim. The crowd is quieter now. Some of them are nodding. Others look thoughtful, maybe a bit challenged. Because this requires something of them. It requires that they stop waiting for circumstances to change and start changing how they meet those circumstances. It requires that they take responsibility for their own time, their own energy, their own days. And that's both frightening and liberating. Frightening because it means they can't blame anyone else. Liberating because it means they have more power than they thought. Father Abraham has been building to something, and now he arrives at it. His voice is still gentle, but there's a directness to what he's about to say. Imagine, he begins, that you are working as a servant in someone else's household. You have a good master, someone fair and decent who treats you well. And suppose that master came around the corner and found you standing idle. Doing nothing. Staring off into space while work waited to be done. He pauses, lets them picture this scene. Would you not feel ashamed? He asks quietly. Would there not be something in you that recoiled at being caught that way? Not because you feared punishment, but because you knew you weren't upholding your end of the arrangement. You were taking wages for work you weren't doing. You were failing in a responsibility you'd accepted. Heads nod around the circle. Yes, they would feel that shame. Most people would. But here's what I want you to consider, Father Abraham continues, and his voice is especially gentle now. You are not actually a servant working for someone else. You are your own master. You answer to yourself. The work you do or don't do, that affects your own life, your own family, your own future. He lets that sink in. Should you not feel that same awareness when you catch yourself idle? Not shame exactly. Not that harsh, punishing feeling. But a kind of honest recognition. A moment of seeing clearly. Here I am, with so much that needs tending, and I'm choosing to do nothing. I'm choosing to let time pass. I'm choosing to leave things undone that would benefit me and those I care about. This is about self-mastery. Not in the sense of harsh discipline or rigid control, but in the sense of being awake in your own life. Noticing your choices. Seeing what you're actually doing with your days. Think about how easy it is to drift. To let hours disappear without quite knowing where they went. We don't set out to waste time. We don't wake up planning to accomplish nothing. But we get distracted. We get caught up in things that don't matter. We avoid what's difficult. And before we know it, the day is gone. Catching yourself idle is simply the practice of noticing. Of checking in with yourself periodically and asking, what am I actually doing right now? Is this how I want to be spending this hour? Is this moving me toward anything I care about? Not to judge yourself harshly. Not to berate yourself for every moment that isn't productive. But to notice. To be honest. And to make a choice, consciously, about what comes next. When you're your own master, no one else is watching. No one else is keeping track. You can be idle all day and face no immediate consequence. But you're still accountable. To yourself. To your own potential. To the life you could be living if you showed up for it. Father Abraham offers an image to help them understand. Remember, he says, the cat in gloves catches no mice. Picture a cat, that elegant predator, but with its paws covered in soft gloves. It might look dignified. It might stay clean. But it can't do what cats are meant to do. It can't grip. Can't climb. Can't catch. The gloves protect it from discomfort, but they also prevent it from being effective. We're often like that cat. We want to do things, accomplish things, but we want to do them without discomfort. Without getting our hands dirty. Without the friction and difficulty that real work involves. We want results without effort. Success without struggle. Growth without growing pains. But it doesn't work that way. To catch mice, you have to take off the gloves. You have to handle your tools, your work, your life, with full contact. Yes, it's messy. Yes, there's discomfort. But that's where capability lives. That's where real engagement happens. Handle your tools without mittens. Do your work directly. Don't try to insulate yourself from the difficulty of it. Lean into the task. Feel the resistance. Work through it. And if you do that, Father Abraham promises, if you stick to it steadily, you will see great effects. Not instantly, but over time. Because persistence has a power that's easy to underestimate. Constant dropping, he says, wears away stones. Think about that. A single drop of water hitting a stone does nothing. You could watch it happen and see no change at all. The stone is hard. The water is soft. There's no visible effect. But drops keep falling. Day after day. Week after week. Year after year. And gradually, so gradually you can't see it happening in any given moment, the stone begins to wear. A tiny depression forms. Deepens. Eventually becomes a groove, then a channel, then a hole worn straight through. The water didn't change. It didn't become harder or more forceful. It just kept falling. Kept making contact. Kept applying that gentle, persistent pressure. That's what steady effort does. That's what showing up, day after day, even when you don't feel like it, even when you can't see progress, that's what that accomplishes over time. We want dramatic change. We want transformation that we can see happening. We want to work hard for a week and have everything be different. And when we don't see that kind of immediate result, we get discouraged. We think our efforts aren't working. We think we're not making progress. But most real change doesn't work that way. Most real change is like water on stone. It's invisible in a moment. You can't see today's effort making any difference. But you keep going. And 6 months later, a year later, 5 years later, you look back and the change is undeniable. Something has shifted. Something has worn away. Something new has emerged. Father Abraham shares another image. Through diligence and patience, he says, the mouse ate through the cable. A mouse. A tiny creature with tiny teeth. And a cable. Something thick and strong, designed to bear weight, to resist force. If you put them side by side and asked which would win, you'd say the cable. Obviously the cable. But the mouse has something the cable doesn't. The mouse has persistence. It gnaws. And gnaws. And gnaws. Day after day. Little bits of fiber at a time. Not trying to bite through it all at once. Not even thinking about the whole job. Just gnawing at what's in front of it. Making small progress. Taking small bites. And eventually, impossibly, the cable gives way. Not because the mouse got stronger. Not because the task got easier. But because persistence, applied steadily over time, accomplishes things that raw force cannot. This is available to all of us. We don't need to be exceptionally talented or extraordinarily strong. We don't need perfect circumstances or ideal conditions. We just need to keep going. Keep applying effort. Keep making small progress. Little strokes fell great oaks. Another image of the same truth. An oak tree is massive, strong, ancient. Its wood is dense and hard. How do you fell such a tree? One stroke at a time. The axe bites in. You pull it free. You strike again. Each blow by itself seems inadequate. The tree is so large. Your progress is so small. But you keep striking. And eventually the tree begins to creak. It leans. And then, with a great groaning crash, it falls. Not because any single blow was powerful enough, but because the cumulative effect of many small blows, precisely placed, patiently repeated, was unstoppable. These images are meant to be encouraging. They're saying you don't have to do everything at once. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have more hours in the day or more energy than you have. You just have to keep going. A little today. A little tomorrow. Steady. Patient. Trusting that small efforts, sustained, have power. Think about learning a language. On any given day, you might learn 10 new words. That seems like nothing. 10 words out of thousands you need to know. It feels futile. How will you ever become fluent at this rate? But 10 words a day is 300 words a month. 3,000 words a year. In 2 years, you've learned 6,000 words. And 6,000 words is enough to read most texts, to have real conversations, to function in that language. The daily effort seems small. But the accumulated result is substantial. Or think about getting stronger. You can't go to the gym once and emerge transformed. One workout doesn't create muscle. It creates microscopic tears that then heal slightly stronger. The difference is invisible. You look in the mirror and see the same body. But you go back. And back. And back. And 6 months later, someone who hasn't seen you in a while says, "You look different. Have you been working out?" The change was happening all along. Too slowly to see from day to day. But undeniable over time. That's the power Father Abraham is pointing to. Not dramatic effort. Not superhuman discipline. Just steady application. Just showing up. Just doing the work that's in front of you, today, without worrying about whether it's enough. It is enough. If you keep at it. The crowd is absorbing this. You can see it in their faces. Some look inspired. Some look daunted. Some are maybe thinking about all the things they've started and not finished. All the times they gave up too soon. But there's also something like hope stirring. Because if small efforts compound, if persistence has this kind of power, then maybe it's not too late. Maybe they can start. Today. Now. And then someone speaks up. A voice from the back of the crowd, uncertain but genuine. "Father Abraham," this person says, "what you're describing, this life of constant industry, of always working, always doing, must a person afford themselves no leisure? No rest? Is there no place for simply being?" The crowd murmurs. Yes. That's what some of them were wondering too. Because as much as they understand the value of diligence, As much as they can see the truth in what he's saying, there's also something in them that resists. That needs rest. That can't imagine living without moments of ease. Father Abraham nods slowly. He expected this question. And he has an answer. But it's not the answer they might expect. I will tell you, Father Abraham says, and there's understanding in his voice, what poor Richard says about leisure. He says, employ your time well, if you want to gain leisure. And since you are not sure of a minute, do not throw away an hour. He pauses, giving them time to hear what he's actually saying. Because on the surface, it might sound like he's denying them rest. But listen more closely. He's not saying there should be no leisure. He's saying that real leisure, genuine rest, comes as a result of how we use our time. Leisure, Father Abraham continues slowly, is time for doing something useful. This diligent person will obtain it. But the lazy person never will. Let's think carefully about what he means here. Because this is subtle. This is about understanding the difference between rest and avoidance. Between restoration and escape. Between leisure and laziness. True leisure is restorative. It's time when you're not working, but you're also not avoiding anything. Your mind is clear. Your conscience is quiet. You can be fully present in the moment because there's nothing tugging at your attention, nothing nagging at the edge of your awareness. Maybe you're taking a walk through woods. The light filtering through leaves. The sound of your footsteps on the path. Birds calling somewhere in the distance. And you're just there. Just walking. Just noticing. Your mind is free to wander, to rest, to simply experience being alive. Or maybe you're sitting with someone you love, talking about nothing important. Laughing about something small. The conversation meanders. There's no agenda. No clock you're watching. Just the simple pleasure of connection. Or maybe you're reading something that opens your mind. Or working with your hands on something creative that has no purpose except that it brings you joy. Or sitting very still, watching the way evening light changes the color of everything it touches. This is leisure. This is rest that actually restores you. When you return from it, you feel more yourself. More centered. More capable. The world feels manageable again in a way it might not have before. But laziness is something else entirely. Laziness is time spent not working, but not really resting either. It's that strange state where you're not doing what you should be doing, and you're not enjoying what you are doing. You're just avoiding. Drifting. Numbing. Maybe you're staring at a screen, scrolling through content you don't care about. You're not entertained. You're not informed. You're not relaxed. You're just filling time. And underneath that distraction, there's a low-grade anxiety. A sense that you should be doing something else. That you're putting off something that will be worse for the putting off. Or maybe you're lying in bed, not sleeping but not getting up either. Not because your body needs rest but because you don't want to face the day. And the longer you lie there, the more anxious you become. The more inadequate you feel. The harder it becomes to actually start moving. This isn't rest. This is a kind of paralysis. And it doesn't restore you. It depletes you. You get up from it feeling worse than when you lay down. The difference between leisure and laziness is this: leisure fills you up. Laziness drains you. Leisure happens when your responsibilities are tended. Laziness is what happens when you're running from them. When Father Abraham says employ your time well if you want to gain leisure, this is what he means. The person who uses their working hours effectively, who focuses and completes what needs completing, that person creates space for genuine rest. Think about someone who has a list of tasks for the day. They could approach it in two ways. They could drift through the day. Start one task, get distracted, wander to another. Check messages. Get pulled into something unimportant. Circle back to the first task. Make some progress. Get distracted again. The hours pass. Some things get done, but not really. Nothing feels complete. Nothing feels finished. When evening comes, they're exhausted. Not from hard work but from the constant low-level stress of partial attention. And they still have this pile of things that didn't get done. So they sit down to rest, but they can't really relax. Part of their mind is still on what they didn't finish. Part of them feels guilty. Part of them is already dreading tomorrow when they'll have to face it all again. Now imagine someone else with the same list. They decide how they're going to move through it. They work on one thing at a time. They give it real attention. They don't check messages every few minutes. They don't let themselves get pulled away. They stay with each task until it's done, or until they've made clear progress. It's focused work. It requires more immediate effort. More discipline in the moment. But it's also more efficient. They get through more in less time. And there's something satisfying about completing things. About checking items off. About seeing the list shrink. When evening comes, they're tired, but it's a clean tiredness. The tiredness of energy well spent. And their list is clear, or at least much lighter. The important things are done. The urgent things are handled. They can set it aside. So when they sit down to rest, they actually rest. They're not thinking about work. They're not feeling guilty. They're not carrying that weight. They can read a book and actually pay attention to it. They can talk with their family and actually be present. They can lie down and actually sleep. This is what employing your time well creates. Not the absence of rest, but the possibility of real rest. Rest that isn't contaminated by avoidance or guilt or anxiety. The diligent person obtains leisure. They earn it. Not in the sense that they deserve it and others don't, but in the sense that their diligence creates the conditions that make genuine leisure possible. The lazy person never finds it. They have plenty of time not working. But none of it feels like rest. None of it restores them. Because they're always carrying the weight of things undone. Always running from responsibilities that just get heavier the longer they're avoided. And since you are not sure of a minute, Father Abraham reminds them again, do not throw away an hour. This isn't about living in fear that time will run out. It's about recognizing that time is the medium of your life. You experience everything through time. Every relationship, every accomplishment, every moment of joy or understanding or growth, it all happens in time. An hour thrown away is an hour of life thrown away. Not because you failed to be productive with it, but because you weren't present for it. Weren't engaged with it. Let it slip past you while you were somewhere else, mentally, emotionally, never quite here. So leisure is time for doing something useful, Father Abraham says. And useful here doesn't mean profitable. It doesn't mean instrumental. It means nourishing. It means meaningful. It means aligned with what matters to you. Leisure is useful for your soul. For your relationships. For your sense of beauty and wonder. For your connection to something larger than your daily concerns. That's useful. That's valuable. That's time well spent. The diligent person will obtain this. Not because they never stop working, but because their work creates space for it. Their focused effort during working hours means they can truly stop when it's time to stop. Can truly be present for rest, for play, for connection, for beauty. The lazy person never quite arrives there. Never quite creates that space. They're always in between. Neither fully working nor fully resting. Always in that uncomfortable middle ground where nothing feels good. Father Abraham looks around at the gathered faces. He can see their understanding. Not just hearing the words, but really taking them in. Some look relieved. As if they've been given permission for something. Permission to work hard, yes, but also permission to rest fully. To enjoy leisure without guilt, because they've earned it through their diligence. And now he's ready to shift to something related but different. He's talked about industry. About the importance of steady effort. But industry alone isn't quite enough. There's something else that matters. So we've spoken about industry, he says, gathering his thoughts. About the importance of steady work and wise use of time. But along with our industry, we must also be steady in another sense. We must be settled. We must be careful. We must oversee our own affairs with our own eyes. He pauses, and you can feel the weight of what he's about to say. We cannot simply work hard and hope that's enough. We must also pay attention. We must be present to the details of our own lives. We must not trust too much to others. Must not assume that things will work out simply because we're putting in effort. There's a wisdom here about sustainability. About the long view. Anyone can work hard in a burst of energy. Anyone can throw themselves at something for a while. But to sustain that work, to make it fruitful, requires more than just effort. It requires steadiness. Attention. Care. This is about being rooted. Being grounded. Not scattered. Not chasing after every new thing. But settled into your work, your place, your life. Tending it carefully. Watching over it. Making small adjustments as needed. Father Abraham is about to explain what he means by this. About what it looks like to be steady and settled. About the cost of being constantly unsettled, always moving, always chasing. About the importance of keeping your attention on your own affairs instead of letting them drift. I have noticed something, Father Abraham says, his voice taking on a reflective quality, about trees and families and businesses. Something about what it takes for them to truly thrive. He's moving into new territory now. Still connected to what he's been saying about industry and diligence, but adding another dimension. Because working hard isn't quite enough on its own. The quality of that work matters. The consistency. The rootedness. I never saw an oft-removed tree, he says slowly, nor yet an oft-removed family, that thrived as well as those that settled be. Picture a tree. When you plant it, you're disrupting its roots. You're asking it to establish itself in new soil. For a while, the tree puts all its energy into that process. Sending roots down. Figuring out the nutrients available in this particular ground. Adjusting to the light, the wind, the water patterns of this specific place. And if you give it time, the tree settles. Its roots go deep. It learns this place. It begins to thrive in ways that are particular to where it is. It grows stronger, taller, more resilient. But if you dig it up again before that settling happens, you set it back. All that energy it put into establishing itself, that's lost. Now it has to start over in new soil. Figure everything out again. And it's weaker for the disruption. More vulnerable. Less able to withstand stress. And if you keep moving it, keep transplanting it every time it starts to settle, that tree never quite thrives. It stays in a constant state of adjustment, always trying to establish itself, always beginning, never getting to the part where it actually flourishes. Families are like this too. Communities are like this. When you move from place to place, constantly starting over, there's a cost. Not that moving is always wrong. Sometimes circumstances require it. Sometimes a change is necessary and good. But constant movement, restlessness, always chasing something else, always thinking the next place will be better, that prevents the kind of deep rooting that allows for real thriving. Think about a family that moves every year or two. The children are always the new kids at school. Always starting over with friendships. The parents are always figuring out new communities, new systems, new ways of doing things. There's no history built up. No network of relationships that deepen over time. No sense of being known and knowing others. Or think about someone who changes jobs every few months. Always looking for something better. Always thinking the next opportunity will be the one. They might have good reasons. Maybe the jobs aren't good fits. Maybe there are real problems. But also, they never stay anywhere long enough to get past the learning curve. Never build expertise. Never develop the kind of relationships with colleagues that make work more satisfying. Never get to the point where things start to feel easier because they've mastered the basics. They're always beginners. Always struggling through those first difficult months. Always in that uncomfortable space of not quite knowing what they're doing. 3 removes, Father Abraham says, are as bad as a fire. That's a striking image. A fire destroys what you've built. It consumes your possessions, your shelter, your security. It sets you back dramatically. And Father Abraham is saying that moving 3 times, uprooting yourself 3 times, has the same devastating effect. Not because moving itself is destructive, but because of what you lose in the constant starting over. The accumulated progress. The established patterns. The networks of support. The deep knowledge of how things work in your particular situation. All of that gets disrupted. And each disruption costs you. Now, this doesn't mean you should never change anything. It doesn't mean you should stay in a bad situation out of fear of disruption. Sometimes a move is exactly what's needed. Sometimes you need to start fresh somewhere new. But it's about recognizing the cost. About being intentional. About understanding that there's value in staying, in settling, in going deep rather than constantly going wide. Keep thy shop, Father Abraham advises, and thy shop will keep thee. This is about showing up. About being present for your work, your life, your responsibilities. A shop that's consistently open, that's reliably there, that pays attention to its customers and its craft, that shop builds something over time. Reputation. Relationships. Skill. Knowledge of what works in this particular place with these particular people. And that accumulated investment pays back. The shop keeps you. Not just in the sense of providing income, though there's that. But in the sense of creating meaning, purpose, a place where you belong and contribute. But if you're inconsistent, if you open when you feel like it and close when you don't, if you're not really present even when you're physically there, the shop can't keep you. There's no foundation being built. No trust being established. No real relationship between you and the work. This applies to more than just shops, of course. Keep your commitments and your commitments will keep you. Show up for your relationships and your relationships will sustain you. Tend your craft and your craft will support you. It's about the way investment compounds over time. Not dramatic investment. Just consistent presence. Consistent attention. Consistent care. Think about someone who goes to the same coffee shop every morning. Not because it has the best coffee in the world, but because it's there, it's reliable, and over time something develops. The barista knows their order. They recognize regulars. There's a feeling of belonging to a small community. The coffee shop becomes part of their daily rhythm, a small anchor point in the larger uncertainty of life. That doesn't happen if you go to a different place every day, always looking for the optimal experience, the best possible coffee, the most interesting atmosphere. You get variety, yes. But you don't get that sense of being known. Of belonging. Of having a place. Father Abraham continues, if you would have your business done, go yourself. If not, send. There's practical wisdom here about responsibility and oversight. Not in a controlling way. Not about micromanaging or refusing to delegate. But about understanding that the things that truly matter to you, you need to be present for. You need to bring your own attention, your own judgment, your own care. When something really matters, you go yourself. You don't assume someone else will care about it as much as you do. You don't assume they'll notice what you would notice. You don't leave it entirely to chance. Think about someone hiring contractors to renovate their home. They could choose never to visit the site. Just let the contractors do their work and hope it turns out well. And maybe it would. Maybe the contractors are excellent and conscientious and would do everything perfectly. But probably not. Probably there would be decisions that needed input. Probably there would be moments where what the homeowner envisioned and what the contractor understood weren't quite aligned. Probably there would be small choices that seem minor but actually matter quite a bit to how the space feels. The person who goes themselves, who shows up regularly, who checks on progress, who asks questions, who stays engaged, that person is more likely to end up with a result they're happy with. Not because they're standing over the contractor's shoulders every minute, but because they're present for the key decisions. They catch misunderstandings early. They provide guidance when it's needed. If you would have your business done, go. Bring your own attention to it. Be present for what matters. If not, if it's not that important, or if you truly trust the person you're delegating to, then send them. Let them handle it. But know the difference. Know what requires your presence and what doesn't. He that by the plow would thrive, Father Abraham says, himself must either hold or drive. This is farming wisdom, but it applies broadly. If you want your work to prosper, you must be directly involved. Either holding the plow yourself, feeling the resistance of the soil, making constant small adjustments, or driving the animals, guiding them, keeping them on course. You can't just own a plow and expect that to be enough. You can't just have fields and assume they'll cultivate themselves. Someone has to do the actual work. And if it's your livelihood, if it's your family's sustenance, that someone needs to be you, at least in some essential way. This doesn't mean you can't have help. Of course you can. But it means you can't be entirely absent from your own enterprise. You can't expect others to care about your success as much as you do. You can't assume things will go well without your involvement. The person who is present, who understands their work intimately, who knows what's happening day to day, that person has a chance to respond when things go wrong. To adjust course. To catch problems early. The person who's distant, who only checks in occasionally, who doesn't really know what's happening, that person is vulnerable. They're depending on luck and the goodwill of others, which might work for a while but isn't sustainable. Think about someone who starts a small business and then immediately tries to step away from it. They hire people to run everything while they pursue other interests. Maybe it works. Maybe they hired well and the people running it are capable and committed. But more likely, without their presence, without their vision and judgment and care, the business starts to drift. Small problems go unnoticed. The culture shifts. Decisions get made that they wouldn't have made. And by the time they check back in, things have degraded in ways that are hard to reverse. Contrast that with someone who stays involved. Not controlling every detail. Not refusing to delegate. But present. Checking in. Understanding what's happening. Available when judgment is needed. Their business has a better chance because it has their attention, their care, their consistent oversight. This is about being grounded in your own life. Not scattered. Not trying to be in 10 places at once. But rooted. Present. Attentive to what's actually happening in front of you. The crowd is listening closely now. This message is landing differently than the earlier one about industry. That was about doing the work. This is about how you do it. About being settled and consistent. About the power of presence and attention. Father Abraham is painting a picture of a certain kind of life. Not a life of dramatic achievements or constant excitement. But a life of steady engagement. Of being there. Of tending carefully to what's in front of you. Of building slowly and patiently rather than chasing after every new thing. It's a quieter vision than what we often hear. But there's something deeply appealing about it. Something that resonates with what we know, even if we don't always live it. That real thriving comes from depth, not breadth. From settling, not constant movement. From presence, not distraction. And he's not quite done with this theme. There's more to say about oversight. About the particular kind of attention that makes the difference between things flourishing and things falling apart. The eye of the master, Father Abraham says, and there's something almost poetic in the way he phrases it, will do more work than both his hands. Let that settle for a moment. Because it seems backwards at first. Surely hands do more work than eyes. Hands lift and build and shape. Eyes just watch. But Father Abraham is pointing to something deeper. Something about the power of attention. When you pay attention to something, when you truly see what's happening, you catch things early. You notice when something is starting to go wrong before it becomes a crisis. You see opportunities that would otherwise pass by. You understand the patterns. You make better decisions because you're working with actual information rather than assumptions. Think about a garden. You could have strong hands, capable of digging and planting and weeding. But if you're not looking at the garden regularly, if you're not noticing which plants are struggling, which ones are being overtaken by weeds, where water is pooling or not reaching, your hands alone won't create a thriving garden. But when you walk through the garden with attentive eyes, when you notice the small signs, when you see that this plant needs support or that one needs to be moved or these need more water, then the work you do with your hands is targeted. Effective. You're responding to what's actually needed rather than just doing generic work and hoping it helps. The eye of the master does more work than both his hands because attention multiplies the effectiveness of action. Without attention, you might work very hard and still move in the wrong direction. But with attention, even small actions can be precisely what's needed. This applies to every area of life. To your finances. To your home. To your health. To your relationships. The person who pays attention, who actually looks at what's happening, who notices patterns and changes, that person can respond before small problems become large ones. Consider someone managing their money. They could work hard, earn a good income, and still find themselves struggling financially. How? Because they're not paying attention. They're not looking at where money actually goes. They're not noticing the small recurring expenses that add up. They're not seeing patterns in their spending. They're not catching problems before they cascade. But someone else, maybe earning less, who pays attention, who knows where every dollar goes, who notices when something is off, who catches a billing error or a subscription they're not using or a pattern of spending that doesn't serve them, that person can thrive financially even without abundance. Because their attention allows them to be strategic, to make adjustments, to optimize, or think about health. You could have access to good doctors, good insurance, good facilities, but if you're not paying attention to your own body, if you're not noticing changes, if you ignore small signals that something isn't right, you might catch problems late when they're harder to address. But the person who pays attention, who notices when something feels off, who doesn't dismiss small symptoms, who knows their own baseline well enough to recognize when things are changing, that person can often catch issues early. Can make adjustments to diet or sleep or stress before they become medical problems. One of care, Father Abraham continues, does us more damage than one of knowledge. This is profound. We often think the problem is that we don't know enough. If only we had more information. If only we understood better. If only we had more expertise. And yes, knowledge matters. But Father Abraham is saying that most of our problems don't come from lack of knowledge. They come from lack of care. From not paying attention. From knowing what we should do but not actually doing it. Think about how much we already know that we don't apply. We know we should eat well, but we don't always care enough to plan meals. We know we should save money, but we don't care enough to track spending. We know relationships need tending, but we don't care enough to reach out, to have difficult conversations, to do the small consistent things that maintain connection. One of care. Not being careless in the sense of being reckless, but in the sense of not bringing care to things. Not tending them. Not giving them the attention they need to thrive. And this does more damage than one of knowledge because knowledge without care is useless. You can know all the right things and still have your life fall apart around you if you're not actually applying that knowledge. Not paying attention. Not following through. Not to oversee workmen, Father Abraham says, and you can hear the weight of experience in his voice, is to leave them your purse open. This isn't about being suspicious or mistrustful. It's about being realistic. When you hire someone to do work for you, they don't have the same stake in the outcome that you do. They're not trying to harm you. But they're also not as invested as you are. They might cut corners you wouldn't cut. They might not notice things you would notice. They might make choices that are fine from their perspective but not what you would have wanted. If you're not there, if you're not overseeing, not checking in, not staying engaged, you might pay for work that isn't done to the standard you expected. You might get materials that aren't what you specified. You might end up with results that aren't what you needed. Leaving your purse open. That's what it amounts to. Not because everyone is dishonest, but because without oversight, without your presence and attention, there's no accountability. No correction. No alignment between what you want and what actually happens. Father Abraham then tells a story. It's simple, almost like a children's rhyme, but it carries a warning that everyone in the crowd understands. For want of a nail, he begins, his voice taking on a rhythmic quality, the shoe was lost. Picture this. A horse, ready to carry someone on an important journey. And one of the horseshoes has a nail that's come loose. It's a small thing. Easy to miss if you're not paying attention. Easy to think it doesn't matter enough to deal with right now. So the rider sets out. And as the horse travels, that loose nail works its way free. Falls out. And without that nail, the horseshoe isn't secure. It shifts. It chafes. And eventually, it falls off entirely. For want of a shoe, Father Abraham continues, the horse was lost. Because now the horse is lame. A horse without a shoe can't be ridden hard. Can't travel fast. Might even be injured by the journey. So the horse becomes useless for the purpose it was needed for. And all because of a nail. A small piece of metal that seemed insignificant. For want of a horse, he says, and his voice is quieter now, the rider was lost. The rider needed to get somewhere. Maybe to deliver a message. Maybe to close a business deal. Maybe to reach someone before time ran out. But without a horse, they can't make it. They're too late. The opportunity passes. The message doesn't arrive. Whatever they were racing toward is lost. And it all traces back to that nail. That small, insignificant nail that someone didn't bother to check. That seemed too minor to worry about. This is a story about how small neglects compound. How little things that we dismiss as unimportant can cascade into large consequences. Not always. Not inevitably. But often enough that we need to pay attention. Think about a small leak in a roof. Just a few drops when it rains hard. Easy to ignore. Easy to tell yourself you'll deal with it later. But those drops keep coming. The water finds its way into the wood. The wood begins to rot. The rot spreads. The structure weakens. And one day, in a heavy storm, part of the ceiling comes down. What would have been a simple repair has become a major reconstruction. For want of attention to that small leak, the ceiling was lost. Or think about a relationship. There's a small tension. Something said that didn't sit right. Easy to let it go. Easy to think it's not worth bringing up. But it sits there. And another small tension adds to it. And another. And gradually, without anyone quite noticing, the distance grows. The warmth fades. And one day you look up and realize you're strangers. The relationship is lost. For want of attention to those small moments, the connection was lost. This is what Father Abraham means by want of care doing more damage than want of knowledge. We know these things matter. We know small problems can become big ones. We don't lack information. We lack the habit of attention. The practice of care. The willingness to deal with small things before they become large things. A little neglect may breed great mischief. That's the summary. That's the warning. Not to make us anxious. Not to make us obsessive about every tiny detail. But to help us understand that attention matters. That small acts of care, consistently applied, prevent most of the disasters we fear. The person who checks the nail, who fixes the small leak, who addresses the small tension, who pays attention to the early signs, that person avoids most of the large problems that plague those who wait until things are critical. The crowd is very quiet now. Some faces look troubled. Because they're thinking about their own small neglects. The things they've been meaning to address but haven't. The small problems they've been ignoring. The attention they haven't been paying. But there's also something useful in this discomfort. Because awareness is the first step toward change. Noticing what you've been not noticing, that's already progress. Father Abraham shifts slightly. He's talked about industry, about the importance of steady work. He's talked about being settled and attentive. But there's one more crucial element he needs to address. Because you can work hard and be consistent and pay attention, and still struggle. Still find yourself barely getting by. So much for industry, he says, and attention to one's own business. But to these we must add something else. Something equally important. We must add frugality. The word hangs in the air. Frugality. It doesn't sound appealing. It sounds like deprivation. Like going without. Like joylessness. But that's not what Father Abraham means. And he's about to explain what he does mean. About the difference between being careful with resources and being miserly. About why earning isn't enough if you don't also think about keeping. A person may work their whole life, Father Abraham says slowly, keeping their nose to the grindstone, as they say. Working dawn to dusk. Never resting. Never pausing. And still, at the end of it all, die without a penny to their name. He lets that sink in. Because it seems impossible, doesn't it? How could someone work so hard for so long and have nothing to show for it? If they know not how to save as they get, he continues, all that effort comes to nothing. A fat kitchen makes a lean will. A fat kitchen. Picture that. A kitchen abundant with food. Rich meals. Expensive ingredients. Everything plentiful. Everything generous. The kind of kitchen that never says no to any appetite, any desire, any whim. It sounds pleasant. It sounds like success, even. Like the reward for hard work. But Father Abraham is pointing to what happens over time when we live this way. When we consume everything we earn. When we let our lifestyle expand to match, or exceed, our income. The will becomes lean. The inheritance becomes nothing. The security that should accumulate through years of work never materializes because it was eaten up as fast as it came in. This isn't about never enjoying what you earn. It's not about living in deprivation while money piles up unused. It's about balance. It's about understanding that building security, creating margin, having something set aside, that matters too. Maybe matters more than we want to admit. If you would be wealthy, Father Abraham says, and notice he doesn't promise wealth, doesn't guarantee it, just suggests that if you want it, think of saving as well as of getting. Most of us think about getting. We think about earning more. About finding better opportunities. About increasing income. And yes, that matters. That's half the equation. But it's only half. The other half is keeping. Holding on to some portion of what comes in. Not all of it. Not most of it, necessarily. But some. Consistently. Over time. Think about someone who earns a modest salary. Not poverty wages, but nothing lavish. Just a regular income. And they're careful with it. They pay attention. They save a portion before they spend. They make choices that prioritize long-term security over immediate gratification. Over years, over decades, that carefulness compounds. They have a cushion for emergencies. They have options. They're not trapped by their circumstances because they have resources. Not because they earn more than everyone else. But because they kept more. Now think about someone who earns double that amount. A generous salary. More than enough, it would seem, to live comfortably. But they spend it all. Their lifestyle expands to match their income, then exceeds it. They have the nicer apartment, the newer car, the better clothes, the more expensive habits. They look successful. They seem to be doing well. But underneath, there's nothing. No cushion. No reserves. No security. One unexpected expense and they're in crisis. One lost job and they're in danger. Because the fat kitchen has left them with a lean will. This happens more often than we like to admit. We tell ourselves we'll start saving when we earn more. But when we earn more, we just find new things to spend it on. The goalpost keeps moving. The lifestyle keeps expanding. And the savings never materialize. Father Abraham warns about little expenses. Beware of little expenses, he says. A small leak will sink a great ship. A great ship. Strong. Well-built. Capable of crossing oceans. But if there's a leak in the hull, if water is slowly, steadily coming in, that ship will eventually sink. Not because of a dramatic storm. Not because of a collision. But because of that small, persistent leak that seems too minor to worry about. Our finances are like that ship. We might have good income. We might be working hard. But if there are small leaks, small recurring expenses that we don't notice or don't think matter, they can sink us just as surely as large ones. Think about subscription services. Each one seems small. A few dollars a month. Nothing worth worrying about. So you sign up. And then another service looks useful, so you sign up for that too. And another. And another. And you don't really keep track. You don't really notice. But add them up. 10 subscriptions at $10 each is $100 a month. Over a year, that's $1,200. For things you might not even be using regularly. For things you might have forgotten you're paying for. Small leaks, but they add up to real money flowing out. Or think about convenience purchases. The coffee on the way to work. The lunch out because you didn't pack anything. The small things you buy at the store because they're there and seem nice even though you don't need them. Each purchase is small. Seems insignificant. Nothing worth denying yourself, surely. But multiply those small purchases over weeks and months. They become substantial. Not because any single one was a problem. But because they're leaks. Small, persistent, unnoticed leaks that slowly drain away resources that could have gone towards something that actually matters to you. Many a little makes a mickle, Father Abraham says. It's an old word, mickle. It just means much, or a lot. Many little amounts add up to a large amount. It works both ways. Many small savings add up to real security. Many small expenses add up to real depletion. We tend to focus on the big decisions. Should I buy this house? This car? Make this investment? And yes, those matter. But the little decisions, made daily, those often have more impact because there are so many of them. They're the small leaks that either drain us or, if we're careful, the small savings that build our security. Think about someone who spends $5 a day on coffee. It's not that coffee is bad. It's not that they shouldn't enjoy it. But if they made coffee at home, the cost might be 50 cents. That's $4.50 saved per day. Over a year, that's about $1,600. Not for giving up coffee. Just for making it at home. That's a small leak plugged. And $1,600, invested or saved, is the beginning of security. It's margin. It's options. It's the difference between feeling trapped and feeling like you have some control over your life. Or think about eating out. A meal at a restaurant might cost $20 or $30. The same meal cooked at home might cost $5 or $6. The restaurant meal isn't bad. The experience has value. But if you're eating out 5 times a week when you could be eating at home, that's a significant leak. $100 or more per week. $4,000 or $5,000 per year. Again, not saying never eat out. Not saying never enjoy conveniences. but asking, are you aware of the cost? Are you making conscious choices? Or are you just letting money flow out through these small, persistent leaks without really noticing? Father Abraham isn't being harsh about this. He's being realistic. He's observing human nature. We're not naturally good at tracking small things. They don't feel important enough to worry about. So we don't. And they accumulate. And eventually we wonder why, despite working hard, despite earning decent money, we never seem to get ahead. Who dainties love shall beggars prove, he says. It's an old-fashioned way of putting it, but the meaning is clear. If you must have luxuries, if you can't be content with simple things, if every desire must be immediately satisfied, you'll end up poor. Not because you didn't earn, but because you couldn't keep. Think about lifestyle creep. You get a raise. Finally. 10% more income. You could save that increase. Could use it to build security. But instead, you upgrade your life. New apartment. New car payment. New habits. And suddenly the 10% is gone. You're no better off than before. Just living more expensively. This happens at every income level. People making 6 figures can be just as financially stressed as people making much less, because their lifestyle has expanded to match. They have the bigger house with higher maintenance. The expensive cars with larger payments. The private schools. The pricier habits. The fat kitchen. And they're working just as hard as someone making half as much, maybe harder, but they're no more secure. They have no more margin. No more peace. Just more obligations, more expenses, more stress. Fools make feasts, Father Abraham observes, and wise men eat them. The fool spends everything on the feast. On the display. On impressing others. On immediate consumption. And enjoys it, yes, for a moment. But then it's gone. And they're left with nothing. The wise person is more careful. They contribute to the feast, but they don't bankrupt themselves doing it. They enjoy it when invited, but they don't feel compelled to host constantly. They can distinguish between genuine generosity and wasteful display. This is about knowing the difference between spending that adds real value to your life and spending that just drains resources without giving much back. The feast that brings people together, that creates memories, that strengthens bonds, that might be worth it. But the feast thrown to impress people who don't really care, to maintain an image that doesn't serve you, that's foolishness. The challenge is that in the moment, it all feels necessary. The convenient coffee feels necessary when you're rushed. The lunch out feels necessary when you're tired. The subscription feels necessary when you first sign up. The upgrade feels necessary when you get the raise. But step back. Look at the pattern. Look at where money actually goes versus where you think it goes. Most people, if they tracked their spending carefully for a month, would be surprised. Would discover leaks they didn't know existed. Would realize they're spending significant money on things that don't actually matter to them, that don't add value, that they barely notice. And that awareness, just that simple awareness, creates the possibility of choice. Of plugging some of those leaks. Of redirecting resources toward things that do matter. Toward building security. Toward creating margin. Toward having options. Father Abraham is building toward something. He's talked about earning through industry. About being steady and attentive. And now about the necessity of keeping what you earn, of being careful with resources. But there's more to say about this. About specific ways we drain ourselves. About the particular temptations that lead us to spend money we don't have on things we don't need. Father Abraham pauses and glances around at the crowd. They're still gathered here, remember, at an auction, waiting for merchants' goods to be sold. And suddenly the setting itself becomes part of his message. These people, worried about money, concerned about taxes, anxious about making ends meet, and yet here they are, preparing to bid on things. To spend money they claim they don't have. He doesn't say this harshly, but you can see the gentle irony in his expression. Buy what thou hast no need of, he says quietly, and before long thou shalt sell thy necessaries. Let that image settle. You buy something you don't need. Maybe because it's on sale. Maybe because it catches your eye. Maybe because everyone else seems to want it. It's not essential. You could live without it. But in the moment, you convince yourself. It's a good price. It might be useful someday. It would be nice to have. So you spend the money. And at first, it seems fine. It's just one thing. Just one purchase. But then there's another. And another. And gradually, imperceptibly, your resources are tied up in things that don't actually serve you. Things you don't use. Things you don't need. And then something happens. An unexpected expense. A necessity that requires attention. And you look around and realize you don't have the money for it. Because it went to all those other things. The unnecessary things. The things that seemed harmless at the time but that have collectively drained you. So now you have to sell things you actually need. Have to let go of necessities to cover the gap. Or worse, you have to borrow. Have to go into debt. All because you bought what you had no need of. Think about someone walking through a store. Not looking for anything particular. Just browsing. And there are sales. Good deals. Things marked down. And the thinking goes, this is such a good price. I'd be foolish not to buy it. I'm saving money by buying it at this discount. But you're not saving money. You're spending money. On something you weren't looking for. Something you don't need. Something that will probably sit in a closet or a drawer, barely used, until eventually you give it away or throw it out. At a great pennyworth, Father Abraham cautions, pause a while. A pennyworth. An old term for a bargain. A really good deal. And his advice is to pause when you encounter one. Don't rush. Don't let the excitement of the deal override your judgment. Ask yourself, do I actually need this? Will this actually improve my life? Or am I just buying it because it's cheap? Because many have been ruined by buying good pennyworths. Ruined not by expensive mistakes, but by cheap ones. By accumulating too many good deals on things that didn't matter. Death by 1,000 bargains. This is something our modern world makes especially easy. Sales. Discounts. Limited time offers. Flash deals. 2 for 1. Buy now or miss out. The entire machinery of commerce is designed to make us feel urgency. To make us buy without thinking. To convince us that the price matters more than whether we need the thing at all. And we fall for it. Not because we're foolish. But because we're human. Because we're wired to respond to scarcity and opportunity. Because we don't want to miss out. Because everyone else seems to be buying, and we don't want to be left behind. Think about online shopping. How easy it is to add things to a cart. How frictionless the purchase has become. Click, click, enter password, done. You don't even see money leaving your hand. It's just numbers changing on a screen. And things arrive at your door, sometimes so many things you forget what you ordered, forget why you wanted it. Each purchase seems small, manageable, nothing to worry about. But they accumulate. The boxes pile up. The things find their way into closets, onto shelves, into corners. And most of them barely get used. Most of them were once disguised as needs. Impulses disguised as decisions. Many a little makes a mickle. Those small purchases, those good deals, those minor indulgences, they add up to real money. Money that could have gone toward security, toward freedom, toward things that actually matter. But there's something else happening here too. Something deeper than just poor financial planning. Father Abraham is about to touch on it now, and he does so gently, because he understands where it comes from. Pride, he says, and the word is soft but weighted. Pride is expensive. Pride has bankrupted more people than any tax could. He's talking about a particular kind of pride now. Not self-respect. Not dignity. Not the healthy pride that comes from work well done. He's talking about the need to appear a certain way. To project an image. To meet expectations that may not even be real. Think about clothing. How much we spend trying to look right. Trying to fit in or stand out, depending on the context. Trying to signal success or taste or belonging. Not because we need the clothes. Not because they're more functional or more comfortable. But because of what we think they say about us. Someone might buy an expensive suit or dress not because they love it, not because it fits perfectly, but because of the label. Because of what they think people will assume when they see it. They're buying not the garment but the perception. The image. And that's expensive. Because image is never satisfied. There's always another level. Always someone dressed better. Always a new trend to keep up with. Always the fear that you'll be judged if you wear the same thing twice or if your clothes aren't quite current. Silks and satins, scarlet and velvets, Father Abraham says, using the luxury materials of his time, put out the kitchen fire. Meaning, spend too much on appearance, on showing status, on maintaining an image, and you'll have nothing left for actual necessities. The kitchen fire goes out. The basics get neglected. Because all your resources went to display. In modern terms, think about someone who drives a luxury car they can barely afford. The payment is enormous. The insurance is high. The maintenance is expensive. And they're stressed about money constantly. They're eating cheap food, living with roommates to save on rent, but they have that car. Because the car is what people see. The car is what signals success. Or think about someone who spends huge amounts on a wedding. Goes into debt for it. Because there are expectations. Because people will judge. Because it has to be perfect, has to be impressive, has to be posted and admired. And then the marriage starts with that debt. With that stress. With resources drained before they'd even begun building a life together. This isn't about never having nice things. It's about understanding why we want them. Are we buying for ourselves, for genuine enjoyment and use? Or are we buying for others, for their perception, for their approval? A plowman on his legs, Father Abraham observes, is higher than a gentleman on his knees. What a powerful image that is. A working person, standing upright, owing nothing to anyone, is in a better position than a wealthy person who's on their knees to creditors. Who's beholden? Who's trapped by debt incurred to maintain appearances? The plowman might not look impressive. Might not have fine clothes or expensive possessions. But they're free. They're secure in their own way. They can walk with dignity because they owe no one. The gentlemen, for all their finery, for all their appearance of success, they're on their knees. They're servile to their debts. They can't make free choices because they're always calculating payments, always worried about keeping up, always trapped by the image they've created. We do this to ourselves more than we realize. We take on obligations, financial and otherwise, to maintain an appearance. To meet expectations that we've internalized from somewhere, from family or culture or media or peer groups. And we think these expectations are protecting us. We think if we just look successful enough, if we just signal the right things, we'll be safe. We'll be respected. We'll belong. But it's a trap. Because that kind of safety is always precarious. Always dependent on continuing to spend, continuing to perform, continuing to maintain the image. And underneath, there's often anxiety. Stress. The knowledge that it's not quite real. That we're stretched too thin. That one disruption could bring it all down. Think about someone living in an expensive neighborhood, in a house that's almost too much for their budget. They did it for the schools, they tell themselves. For the property values. For the address. And maybe those things matter. But maybe they matter less than the constant stress of the mortgage. Less than the inability to save for retirement. Less than the tension in the marriage over money. Or think about someone who always picks up the check at dinner. Always has to be the generous one. Has to be seen as successful, as doing well. And they are doing well, maybe. But they're also spending more than they should to maintain that image. And they can't stop because they've created expectations. People assume. People expect. And they're trapped by their own generosity performed for the wrong reasons. Father Abraham understands this. He sees how people tie themselves in knots trying to appear right. Trying to signal status. Trying to avoid judgment. And he has compassion for it. Because the impulse isn't bad. We all want to be respected. We all want to belong. We all want to feel secure. But the method is flawed. Because real security doesn't come from appearance. Real respect doesn't come from displays of wealth. Real belonging doesn't require expensive signals. The person who lives within their means, who's careful with resources, who doesn't try to impress, they're building something real. Something solid. They're free in ways that the person maintaining an expensive image isn't. And freedom, Father Abraham is suggesting, freedom is more valuable than any fine clothing or impressive possession. Freedom to make choices. Freedom from debt. Freedom from the constant anxiety of keeping up appearances. The crowd is getting uncomfortable now. Because this is hitting close. Many of them are probably here at the auction planning to buy things they don't really need. Planning to spend money they're worried about not having. And Father Abraham is holding up a mirror, gently but clearly, asking them to look at what they're doing. But he's not done yet. Because there's something even more serious to address. Something that goes beyond just spending on unnecessary things or maintaining appearances. There's the matter of debt itself. Of borrowing against the future. Of mortgaging tomorrow to pay for today's desires. And that, Father Abraham is about to explain, that's where pride and folly can lead to something truly dangerous. To a loss of freedom that goes deeper than just financial stress. To a kind of bondage that touches every aspect of life. Father Abraham's voice becomes even gentler now. Because what he's about to discuss is sensitive. Painful for many. He's going to talk about debt, and he knows that many in this crowd are probably carrying some. Knows the weight of it. The way it sits on you. The second vice is lying, he says. The first is running in debt. Think about that ordering. Debt is worse than lying, in Father Abraham's view. Not because borrowing is always wrong. There are times when debt makes sense. When it's used to build something, to create opportunity, to invest in what will grow. But that's not the kind of debt he's worried about. He's worried about debt taken on for superfluities. For things that don't need to be bought. For maintaining appearances. For satisfying immediate desires without thought to the future. That kind of debt, it's not building anything. It's just trading future freedom for present gratification. And the cost of that trade, it's higher than most people realize when they make it. Think about what debt does to you, beyond just the money. It creates a constant background hum of anxiety. Even when you're not actively thinking about it, it's there. You wake up knowing you owe. You go to sleep knowing you owe. Every financial decision is colored by it. Every unexpected expense is more frightening because you have less margin. Less room to maneuver. Debt changes how you feel about work. You can't easily walk away from a bad situation because you need the income to service the debt. You can't take risks that might lead somewhere better because you can't afford the uncertainty. You're trapped, in a very real sense, by obligations you took on perhaps without fully understanding their weight. It is hard for an empty bag to stand upright, Father Abraham says. Picture that. A bag with nothing in it. It collapses. Falls over. Can't maintain its shape. It needs something inside to give it structure, to allow it to stand. When you're in debt, when your resources are already committed before they arrive, you're like that empty bag. You can't stand upright. Can't maintain dignity. Can't make free choices. You're always bent, always compromised, always dependent on the next payment coming in to cover the last obligation. Contrast that with someone who owes nothing. Who has even a modest cushion of savings. They can stand upright. Can look their circumstances in the eye. Can make choices based on what's right rather than what's required. That's worth more than any luxury debt might purchase. Credit, Father Abraham warns, gives another power over your liberty. When you owe someone money, they have power over you. Not legal power, necessarily, though sometimes that too. But psychological power. Social power. The power that comes from your being obligated to them. From your owing them something they can demand. Think about how that changes relationships. How debt to a friend or family member adds tension to what was once simple. How owing your employer makes it harder to negotiate, to speak up, to advocate for yourself. How owing anyone makes you more compliant, more careful, more reluctant to do anything that might jeopardize your ability to pay. That's liberty lost. And we trade it so casually, often for things we barely remember buying a few months later. Creditors have better memories than debtors, Father Abraham observes, and there's a wry truth to that. The person who's owed money, they remember every detail. Every amount. Every due date. Every promise. It's in their interest to remember. Their attention is focused on getting back what they're owed. But the person who owes, they'd rather not think about it. They'd prefer to forget. To minimize. To push it out of awareness. And so they do, until the creditor reminds them. Until the bill arrives. Until the call comes. This asymmetry, it's part of what makes debt so insidious. The creditor is thinking about it more than you are. Planning for it. Tracking it. While you're trying to live your life, they're calculating interest, watching due dates, preparing to collect. And here's what Father Abraham says about how serious this is: rather go to bed supperless than rise in debt. Rather be hungry for a night than wake up owing someone. Rather do without than borrow to have. Because the hunger is temporary. The discomfort passes. But the debt lingers. Grows. Complicates everything that comes after. This isn't about never borrowing. It's about understanding the true cost. About being willing to delay gratification. To wait. To save first and buy later. To live within your actual means rather than your imagined future means. Think about how different life feels when you owe nothing. When the money you have is actually yours. When no one has a claim on it. When you can make decisions freely. That peace, that freedom, it's hard to put a price on. But it's easily lost. And once lost, hard to regain. The crowd is very still now. Some people are looking down. Some are nodding slowly. They know what he's talking about. They've felt the weight he's describing. And maybe they're thinking about their own debts. Their own compromises. Their own loss of liberty. But Father Abraham isn't leaving them in despair. Because now he's going to shift. To put all of this in a larger context. To remind them of something important. This doctrine, my friends, he says, and his voice is warm now, full of care, is reason and wisdom. But do not depend too much upon your own industry and frugality, though they are excellent things. For they may all come to nothing without the blessing of heaven. He's been talking about practical matters. Work in saving and attention and care. All of it important. All of it useful. But none of it guaranteed. Life is uncertain. Circumstances change. We can do everything right and still face difficulty. Can work hard and be careful and still encounter hardship. And so, Father Abraham reminds them, ask for that blessing humbly. Recognize that we're not entirely in control. That there's mystery to how life unfolds. That humility, gratitude, and openness to something larger than ourselves, that matters too. And then he adds something crucial: be charitable to those in want. Because in all this talk about saving and being careful with money, there's a danger of becoming tight-fisted. Of forgetting that resources are meant to flow. That we're connected to each other. That those who have more have a responsibility to those who have less. Being frugal doesn't mean being miserly. Doesn't mean holding so tight to what you have that you never give. Doesn't mean closing your heart to others' needs because you're anxious about your own security. True security isn't just having resources. It's being generous with them. It's remembering that we're all part of a larger community. That what we have, we hold temporarily. That it's meant to be used, shared, circulated in ways that help others and create connection. Someone in genuine need, someone struggling despite their efforts, they deserve help. Deserve compassion. And if you have something to give, if your own careful management has created margin, then some of that margin is meant for giving. For supporting others. For participating in the human community with open hands. Father Abraham is nearly finished now. He's shared all the wisdom poor Richard accumulated over years. All the observations about time and work and attention and money and pride and debt. And now he concludes with one final proverb. Experience keeps a dear school, he says, but fools will learn in no other. Experience is expensive. The lessons we learn through our own mistakes, through suffering the consequences of poor choices, those lessons cost us. Cost us in money, in time, in opportunity, in peace. That's the dear school. The expensive education. But some people, Father Abraham observes without judgment, will only learn that way. Won't listen to advice. Won't learn from others' experiences. Have to touch the hot stove themselves to believe it burns. They that will not be counseled cannot be helped, he continues. If you will not hear reason, she will surely rap your knuckles. Reason is gentle at first. Speaks quietly. Offers guidance. But if you refuse to listen, if you insist on learning everything the hard way, reason becomes a harder teacher. The consequences themselves do the teaching. And those lessons, they hurt. But they're available now, here, without that cost. The wisdom is being offered freely. The counsel is given with care. And each person can choose. Learn now from words, or learn later from experience. Father Abraham falls silent. His speech is finished. In the crowd, they've been listening intently. They nod. They murmur approval. Yes, they say. This is true. This is wise. We should live this way. And then, as Franklin tells it with gentle irony, they immediately do the opposite. The auction begins. The merchant's goods are laid out. And these same people who just heard all this wisdom about not buying what you don't need, about being careful with money, about avoiding debt, they start bidding. They start buying. The very behaviors they just agreed were foolish, they engage in them anyway. Franklin watches this with a kind of wry affection. He's not angry. Not surprised. Just observing human nature. How we can know what's right and still not do it. How understanding doesn't automatically translate into action. How we're all more complicated than simple wisdom can account for. The good man had thoroughly studied my almanacs, Franklin notes, and digested all I had dropped on those topics during the course of many years. Father Abraham had absorbed it all. Made it his own. Woven it together beautifully. And as for Franklin himself, he came to the auction intending to buy fabric for a new coat. He'd been planning it. Had the money set aside. It seemed reasonable. Necessary, even. But after hearing Father Abraham speak, after having his own wisdom reflected back to him in this concentrated form, he makes a different choice. I went away, he writes, resolved to wear my old one a little longer. Not forever. Not as a grand gesture. Just a little longer. The old coat still has life in it. Still serves its purpose. The new one can wait. And in that waiting, in that small choice to delay, there's freedom. There's peace. There's alignment between what he knows and what he does. And then he turns to you, the reader. To us. To anyone hearing this story. Reader, if thou wilt do the same, thy profit will be as great as mine. Not in money, necessarily. Though that might follow. But in peace. In freedom. In the satisfaction of living with integrity. Of making choices that serve your real well-being rather than just your immediate desires or others' expectations. The wisdom is here. Given freely. Offered gently. The question is just whether we'll take it. Whether we'll let it change not just how we think but how we live. Whether we'll wear the old coat a little longer. The choice, as it always is ours to make. And so ends the tale that Father Abraham told. The wisdom gathered from years of Poor Richard's almanacs, woven together in a single conversation. About time and work. About attention and care. About saving and spending. About pride and debt. About the quiet choices that shape our days and, through those days, our entire lives. It's not complicated wisdom. Not esoteric or difficult to understand. Just observations about what works and what doesn't. What brings peace and what brings trouble? What creates freedom and what creates bondage? The kind of wisdom that every generation needs to hear, and every generation needs to discover again for themselves. Because knowing isn't quite the same as living. Understanding isn't quite the same as doing. But it starts with listening, with considering, with holding these ideas gently and seeing where they touch your own life. Where you recognize yourself in the patterns described. Where you might make different choices. Not all at once. Not perfectly. Just a little better. A little more conscious. A little more aligned with what you actually want your life to be. Wear the old coat a little longer. That's where it begins. With one small choice. One small delay. One small act of resistance against the constant pressure to consume, to display, to keep up, to never be satisfied with what you have. And from that one choice, others follow. A life built slowly, carefully, with attention and care. A life that's yours. That's free. That's grounded in something real. May you find that life. May you build it day by day. May you rest in the peace that comes from living within your means, within your truth, within your true needs rather than your endless wants. Richard Saunders.